Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.
When they reached out to me, your publicist reached out about the book, and I really wondered, what you were doing with this, what you were covering. And what I find interesting, Jay, is that this came from you're working with John Lennon of the Beatles to help him through a trial situation. Talk a little bit about this for me.
Well, I met John on February 3rd, 1975 at the offices of Capitol Records. My senior partner, David Dahl, asked me to go to this meeting because Capitol was discussing a possible problem with somebody issuing a pirated John Lennon album called Roots. Mm-hmm. And so about halfway through the meeting, the conference room door opened and in walked John Lennon, which, needless to say, was a bit of a shock. I didn't know he was going to be there. I don't know whether the Capitol lawyers knew, but we spent about an hour together, had a great conversation. And the result of the meeting was that after I learned that this Morris Levy, who was a notorious figure in the music industry in New York City in those days, and even going back into the 50s when he founded Roulette Records, he was going to release this pirated version of John Lennon's Oldies album. Mm-hmm. And after a few minutes of discussing this whole thing, John decided, after I asked him, how long will it take to finish the album now? And John said, I can go into the record plant tomorrow and do it in 2 days. And after that, we discussed it with Capitol, and that was the decision. And John did go into the studio on the 4th and the 5th. And on the 6th, the parts were shipped to Capitol's manufacturing plant. Wow. But in the meantime, we had gotten more rumors that Levy was going to actually start advertising the album that weekend on TV across the country. He was going to sell it, where you send in your $4.95 and they mail you the album. So we, Capitol and John, sent out some telegrams to various radio and TV stations and warned them that this was not the official John Lennon Capitol Records album. Right. When the album was actually released, it was called John Lennon Rock and Roll. On February 13th, Levy then pulled the advertising, and I think he'd sold about 1,250 copies of this album called Roots. And then about a week later, sued John in New York Supreme Court and Capitol, EMI, Apple Records, claiming that John had made an oral agreement back in October of 1974 to allow Levy and one of his companies to market it on TV on a worldwide basis. And then about 2 weeks later, a bigger surprise, his lawyers filed a federal case, an antitrust case in the New York federal court, alleging about $14 million in damages. The New York Supreme Court case was, I think, alleged about $7 million. And amazing. At that point, we were off to the races.
Well, and I've got to bring this up too, Jay, to where what I found so unique about your book, you get to understand the artistic method behind the recordings and everything, because what was used for the Roots album, the bootleg, was a rough mix. It wasn't even a finished mix when it's mixed down and done correctly and you've got the vocals right. It was not, something that John Lennon or any artist of that level would put out for an album.
Well, that's correct, because he did this. He recorded with his band. It was about a month later that Levy kept harassing him about, when am I going to hear my songs? When am I going to hear my songs? And finally, John gave him, big mistake, two reel-to-reels. They were 7.5 IPS, inches per second. There was obvious obviously a rough mix of the album. And going back a little bit to what you said, I actually decided to write the book first. And then it was a friend of mine down here in North Carolina, a playwright and a director. The more I talked to her about this book I was beginning to work on, she then came up with the idea of doing this live show that we did. The real reason I wrote this book was I carried around with me for almost 40 years the entire transcript of the trial.
Wow.
In 5 or 6 banker's boxes through 5 moves. And finally, it was just about 5 years ago now, I had them stored out in my garage. I went out to the garage because I was thinking, what am I going to do with these things? Should I give them to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or what? And I sat down on one of the boxes and started reading John's testimony. And then I realized how important his testimony was and that there was a great story here, a great story that had never been told.
Well, you know, what's amazing too to me, Jay, and you've represented a number of high profile, you know, artists and athletes and everything else in your great career, but a lot of the issues within the book with John Lennon and also having a judge that, you know, really didn't know the Beatles or understand the whole music process and everything is that still today in 2022, a lot of these same music problems are happening with artists to where with their music and with their content and everything. So even though this pulled from the transcripts from the court cases, you know, when you became such good friends with John Lennon and moving within that group, the same things are happening today within the music industry.
Well, you know, it's probably even easier for it to happen today, Eric, with all of the, you know, the gadgets that and electronic gadgets that they have now. This was really kind of in 1975, 76. So they were beginning to move from 15 inches per second from master tapes to 30 inches per second. But this album was done in 15.
Well, you know, and I really enjoyed the foreword that Bob Gruen did for you, the famed photographer. And I thought he did a great job of kind of opening up this book, you know, and the pictures in here and everything else to where you really get a snapshot of the time that you were working with John Lennon. Then unfortunately, John passed away in 1980. And I know you made mention that he was going to write a song or songs about going through this whole court case and all these problems also, Jay.
Well, it was actually the day that Bob Gruen sneaked a camera into the courtroom, which I didn't know he was going to do. This was in the winter of 76. And after that day in court, when John was testifying, and again, he was testifying as I will explain the photo, with the Judge Grisey, who, as you mentioned, did not know anything about the Beatles or John Lennon, but he was an amateur musician. He played the harpsichord. He was a pianist. And he told us right early in the case, I listened to a lot of music, but I don't know anything about this music. So I want to learn what it's about. So that afternoon, when we were driving back uptown in John and Yoko's limo, I said to John, I saw Bob Gruen in court today. What was he doing here? Now, I really didn't know Gruen. He had showed up at Sloppy Louie's, this restaurant, a fish restaurant in New York, where we were having lunch one day and took a picture of us. And that picture is in the book. So I said, what was Bob doing in court today? And John said, well, I had him come in to take a picture of me testifying. And I said, you know, that's not really allowed. That may be a violation of law. And John said, oh, it's all right. He covered the camera with his coat. And
oh, that makes it all okay. You're like the lawyer going, oh, well,
I mean,
no problem.
Eric, this was in the beginning of the time when you had to go through security checks. You know, and the metal detectors and everything. I don't know how Bob got the camera in there, but anyhow, I said, well, then why the picture? And he said, someday I'm going to write an album of songs about all of my and the Beatles' legal problems, and that's going to be the cover of the album. And I thought to myself, boy, this guy is always thinking ahead. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it wasn't until decades later that I told that story to Bob. And he said, oh, God, I never heard that before. But Bob was the one who, when I started thinking about the book and talking to him about using some of his photos, that really said to me, you know, you've got to put the testimony in, because that day I took the picture, I sat there for a long time and listened to John's testimony, and it was fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I said, don't worry. That's one of the main reasons I'm writing this book, is so that people will get to see John, be able to kind of hear John's voice as they read his testimony. The important thing about this book is that this was a time, as you're saying, you get a snapshot and you get a look at John Lennon at a time in his life when he dropped out of the music business. He got back with Yoko. She became pregnant, and he really chilled out. And he didn't do anything for about 6 years until August of 1980, when he and Yoko and Jack Douglas started recording Double Fantasy. So this gives you a picture of John Lennon, not the rock icon, mm-hmm. just John Lennon, the person who wanted to, you know, he loved New York, and, you know, and we became friends, but we weren't close friends. In fact, John at one point, Levy's lawyer tried to get him to say that he and Morris were close friends. And John has this, I think I quoted it in the book, John has this little segment where he said, well, you know, I looked upon him more as a character because Morris talks like this. He said he had polyps, thought he had polyps in his throat. And, you know, it takes a long time to make close friends. And right. I don't really have many of them. But John and I got along very well. I think primarily because once I got over the surprise of John Lennon walking into the room, and I was a big rock and roll fan from my high school days, and loved the Beatles. I saw the Beatles at Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in 1964. He was just a client, and that's the way I treated him. I didn't ask for an autograph. I didn't ask for any of that photo at Sloppy Louie's. I didn't even know he was going to have a copy made and sent to me. I didn't know why he even had it taken.
So amazing. Well, I've got to bring this up now that the book is available, Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer, which the lawyer is you. I want to make sure our viewers know where they can buy the book, you know, and I know it's available probably everywhere, Jay, but also I know you're going to be doing some book signings and other things around the country to where when they get their copy, they can get it signed by you as well. What is the best website and social media for our viewers to go to, Jay?
Well, the best website is Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer.com. That's my website. And social media, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Just plug in Jay Bergen, John Lennon, and they'll find me.
Well, I'll tell you what, congratulations on a great book, Jay Bergen, with Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. But it's great talking with you. An incredible book if you're a Beatles fan or a John Lennon fan, or you're just in the music industry. I think this is well worth the read. Thank you for coming on the show, Jay.
I appreciate it very much, Eric. Thank you. Good luck to you.
Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of a Bobby Bones Show.